taken the Covishield vaccine may now have to wait longer for the second jab. As per the new recommendations by a government panel on vaccination, the jab must be taken now with a gap of 12 to 16 weeks when it comes to Covishield. The gap remains the same when it comes to Covaxin.
What Serum Institute's chief said months ago to India Today, the Indian government panel recommends today.
You're suggesting that if I get a second dose within a month of my first dose, then the efficacy is about 70%. If, however, there is a gap of 2.5 or 3 months between the first and the second dose, then the efficacy is 90%. Is that what you're trying to suggest?
Well, I'm only echoing what the CEO of AstraZeneca has said, and it's come out from Oxford and AstraZeneca from the trials, because one arm, which did it with 1 month apart, was 60% effective to 70% effective, as you mentioned. And there was another few thousand group of patients where they gave a gap between dose 1 and dose 2. And that's where they found 90%. So, the regulator is going to recommend 1 month to 3 months as a gap.
The National Technical Advisory Group on Immunization has made sweeping recommendations for vaccination in India. The government panel suggests increasing the time between 2 shots of the Covishield vaccine. Now, one should wait for 12 to 16 weeks to take the second dose of Covishield. Earlier in March, the centre wrote to states to increase the gap between 2 doses to 4 to 8 weeks. The earlier gap was 28 days. There's been no change, however, for Covaxin. Experts have highlighted the scientific evidence behind this decision.
With the Covishield, what's happened is they've picked this data out from the AZD122 trial, where they actually found in a small subset of patients that when they gave the second jab within less than 6 weeks, the efficacy was about 54.9%. When they increased this between 6 to 8 weeks, it went to 59.9%. When they made it between 9 to 11 weeks, it went to 63.7%. And when they increased the gap between the 2 weeks by about 12 weeks, between the 2 doses, about 12 weeks, the efficacy rose to 82.4%. I think that's where this recommendation comes from.
But many would say a shortage of vaccines in India could have possibly led to this recommendation.
The thing is that there is obviously a supply crunch, and there is also a need to vaccinate a large proportion of the population. So under the circumstances, the line of thinking is okay. I think 12 weeks is logical, but 12 to 16 weeks, I'm not sure there is a lot of science behind it. What would be better is to actually, instead of saying that people who've had COVID can wait 6 months for the jab, it would be better to actually test antibodies in people before vaccinating them. And those who have beyond a certain level of antibodies, which are protective, they could actually wait on the jab.
Other suggestions are those recovered from COVID-19 must wait for 6 months to take the vaccine. While there's little evidence to suggest how long the antibodies created after surviving the infection last, the US CDC continues to recommend 90 days or 3 months after recovery. While experts in India suggest doing an antibody test to check before a COVID-19 recovered person takes the shot, in the current circumstance, when should one take the second shot of infected after the first one is also a dilemma. The government panel recommendations also says that pregnant women could take the jab after delivery. But for now, these will be sent to the National Advisory Committee on Vaccination for a final decision.
Well, these current government panel recommendations come in the backdrop of most people having to hunt for vaccines, even to get the first jab as well as the second jab, as most private and government facilities have already run out of vaccines. Could the government's recommendation have anything to do with the shortage in supply? And could this recommendation help subvent that gap in supply and demand of vaccines at this point? Or is it only based on scientific evidence? In New Delhi, Milan Sharma for India Today.
Big announcement being made by Dr. V.K. Paul, where he says that vaccine for all by the first quarter of 2022, India should have 3 billion doses. Sputnik will be in the market by next week is what the government is extremely hopeful about. And while all of this happens, major boost for mass vaccination for kids. That's the effort. Drug controller, the DCGI, has approved phase 2 and phase 3 trials of Covaxin on children. We bring you this report.
As pediatric wards get crowded with young ones, one thing is very clear. The coronavirus is not leaving children unaffected. The second monster wave of COVID-19 is seeing more children get infected, even those less than 5 years old. And now, a vaccine for children could be the only ray of hope against the highly infectious variants. India's indigenous vaccine maker Bharat Biotech spoke in 2020 about developing a COVID-19 vaccine for children in India. But it is only now that the firm has obtained approval from the Indian drug regulator to proceed with trials. The DCGI has given a green signal to Bharat Biotech to begin phase 2 and 3 clinical trials on children aged between 2 to 18 years, as experts weigh in on the need to now vaccinate children.
Covaxin may take time, but we should vaccinate this group as soon as possible to prevent the third wave. One. Second, why it is important? Because in pediatric age group, you cannot isolate them in room. You cannot confine them in room. Very soon they will be out to the schools. They can be super spreader. They are very near and dear to the grandparents, so they can be very injurious. If they become contagious, they can be very injurious, very unsafe for the elderly. So we need to vaccinate them.
As kids remain locked up in homes, the vaccine for children and adolescents could help return children safely back to schools.
This is more to have a final fight against the COVID, because children can be involved in transmission, and by doing so, we can safely open up our schools and the other activities which children have not been able to do, like camps and sports and other gatherings which they have not been able to do. So that will be a huge boost. Please give it to your children as and when this is offered and the scientific world clears it off.
The US FDA has approved Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine for children of 12 to 15 years of age. Pfizer has also asked the UK drug regulator to give a go-ahead to vaccinate the kids in UK.
Even as Bharat Biotech has now been given permission by the SEC to begin trials, we'll still have to wait for at least several months before we could have a vaccine to protect children against the coronavirus. But experts have warned that the third wave, which is impending, could target children more than adults, because estimates suggest that by such time, many eligible adults would have at least taken one shot of the COVID-19 jab, which will make children and the younger population susceptible to getting infected, which is why vaccination for younger children is the need of the hour. In New Delhi, Milan Sharma for India Today.
Several doctors are advising against the rampant use of Remdesivir and some other drugs. Opinions, of course, are mixed over the utilization of some of these drugs, but the Health Ministry is very clear. Do not think that the Remdesivir is any kind of a magic bullet. The ministry's standard operating procedure says that in the past, there hasn't been any use for these vaccines in the initial days of the infection, or those who are either mild or asymptomatic patients.
The COVID pandemic is making people believe in magic bullets. They think that some medicines can be popped anytime and will help them in recovery of COVID patients. But in reality, that's not true. With such cases growing, many doctors have come forward advising against medicine abuse.
Whoever has prescribed it, if you go up in the detail, it works only in the first 7 to 10 days because it's an antiviral medication. So it's going to stop the viral replication. Once the 10 days are passed, when the virus is not replicating now we are dealing with the COVID, post-COVID or the COVID sequelae or the damage done by the virus. It should not be prescribed if anyone has a liver problem, so if anyone is having a kidney problem, because it can cause damage to that also and can worsen the scenario of the patients. So you prescribe some medication to someone, they will copy paste and start prescribing to others also. And even now the families also start taking the same medication without even consulting the doctor, which is not a right thing.
The magnitude of the crisis is such, it has forced manufacturers of such medicines to come out strongly against rampant use.
Ivermectin was a drug which has shown some benefits, especially by the Australian and the Bangladesh trial. They showed definitely it worked. Even the guidelines started prescribing it as a prophylactic to some extent, but not everyone is not to be taken this Remdesivir. They can be taken to the healthcare workers who are more prone for getting infection. But everyone starting taking Ivermectin is not a drug to be taken by everyone.
In fact, both Remdesivir and Ivermectin haven't been approved by World Health Organization and has repeatedly warned against its extensive use.
Most of the reports published point out towards the fact that these medicines have found out not to have any immediate impact on COVID patients. Doctors believe copy-pasting of prescription is something which should be stopped immediately. If one needs to buy medicines, they should only do it when their doctor tells them. The exact dosage and the time should be monitored very closely, otherwise people can land in deep trouble. This is Aishwarya Paliwal reporting from the National Capital.